Hello, and welcome to Modern Scuba's YouTube channel. This is a presentation I produced for an instructor class that I took, and it's basically a introduction for the dive planer involving bubble theory and decompression sickness avoidance. The intent was to introduce my audience to the tables and why divers need to plan and understand basic bubble theory and decompression sickness prior to making any dives. This was for a law enforcement group, so it's not a technical diving class. So please take the time to learn your tables. I know there's a lot of people that say that you got to dive your computer and have a computer, but the tables and understanding the why is more important to me than just following what a computer says. And in that spirit, we're going to start around 1840 with Kazon disease. Kazon was a pressurized chamber used underwater so that workers could do their mining and other work underwater in a safe environment. Charles Jean Trigger, man after my own heart, named his device Kazon, which is French for box, because basically it's a box that's upside down, pushed underwater, and then air is pumped into it to displace the water so that the workers inside can breathe air and do their work while completely submerged. In around 1860, they started building the St. Louis Bridge. They used Kazons again here, and workers were experiencing some issues when they got down below 60 feet. Issues were primarily something along the lines of joint pain, some partial paralysis of lower limbs, and a few people died. Workers would come back up from their tours in the Kazon and bent over position, which gave them the term the bends. Then in 1878, French physiologist Paul Bert determined that breathing air under pressure forced quantities of nitrogen into solution in the body and or tissue in the blood and tissues of the body. Basically, it's just like with your can of Coke, the pressure on the outside was absorbed by the fluid on the inside, and the body is more or less fluid, so it's absorbed. When you quickly release the pressure off that Coke bottle, the bubbles begin. So that's when the worker left the Kazon, the nitrogen returned back out of pressure and created bubbles which went through the body. And in the case of the Kazon disease, those bubbles formed too quickly for them to pass out of the body like you normally would, usually through breathing. Which brings us into Boyle's law, since we're dealing with pressure. If you watched the last presentation I did on diving physics, this will be very familiar. If you're a diver, this is extremely familiar. You have your depth, your relative atmospheres, your absolute atmospheres, the pressure changes, and some volume changes as density changes relative to pressure. So in the early 1900s, physician physiologist John Haldane developed a method to avoid Kazon disease that revolved around half tissue half times. Basically, he realized that Boyle's law was pushing gases into a solution, and as the pressure was coming off, the bubbles were becoming too big to normally expire out through the lungs. In fact, it's such a profound discovery that Haldane's theory is still used for modern diving medicine. This is the basis for our dive tables. So he basically introduced Henry's law into the figure. Henry's law states the amount of any given gas that will dissolve in a liquid at a given temperature is directly proportional to the partial pressure of that gas. So short, a gas will absorb into a liquid at a rate proportional to its pressure. So with your Coke bottle, you've got, say, 15 pounds of CO2 on top of the Coke. Eventually, that gas is going to become neutral between the pressure of the gas in the liquid and the pressure above it. So with Dalton's law in mind, we're going to take the total pressure exerted, but then we're also going to look at it in both the nitrogen and the oxygen percentages. We actually use oxygen, so it is metabolized through your body, so it's less of a concern. The nitrogen is an inert gas, so you're not actually going to use it, so it's just going to store up in the liquids and in your body. So when you combine Dalton and Henry's law at 1 atmosphere, your partial pressure of oxygen is 0.21 ATA, and your partial pressure of nitrogen is 0.78 ATA, which is what we're breathing right now on the surface, assuming we're all at the surface breathing right now. Then as you go to your second atmosphere, absolute, which is going to be about 33 feet, your partial pressure of oxygen is going up to 0.42 ATA, and your nitrogen is going up to 1.56 atmospheres, absolute. As you're down to your fourth atmosphere, around 99 feet, your partial pressure of oxygen is up to 0.84 ATA, and your nitrogen is up to 3.12 ATA. So you have a pretty significant rise in the partial pressure of nitrogen going into your lungs and then being distributed throughout your body. So we're going to use the Haldane model to reduce the risk of bubble formation, and we're going to do that by measuring our depth and our bottom time. And our ultimate goal is to prevent the supersaturation of nitrogen into our tissues and then come up in a rate that's going to allow the saturated gases to expire normally through your lungs. So the U.S. Navy Experimental Diving Unit continued Haldane's experiments, and they produced a set of no decompression tables, some decompression tables, and mixed gas tables. For most of us divers, there's no need to look at the Navy tables because we are not fresh out of boot camp at the best shape of our lives that we've ever been, almost no body fat, working out every single day for the last few months. Most of us aren't that person. So I recommend avoiding the Navy dive tables unless you are that person. The easy way to tell the Navy dive tables is they will have Navy no decompression tables will be 60 feet for 60 minutes. I believe most recreational dive planners should be about 50 to 55 minutes at 60 feet. So what is decompression sickness? Decompression sickness is actually 3 different types of illnesses that we're going to look at individually. Most serious is probably going to be the arterial gas embolism, or AGE. Then you have decompression illness and pneumothorax. These are 3 are going to be your most significant risk. So arterial gas embolism is tiny bubbles floating free in arterial blood. So what the problem with this can be is that blood can cause more or less a clot and prohibit blood from flowing to certain parts of your body. It can also enter the lungs and go between the bodies of the lungs and cause pneumothorax. Do not re-dive an injured diver. Seek decompression chamber treatment if you suspect AGE, even though I was just watching a Dan presentation on re-diving a bent diver. I don't think it's an official diagnosis or an official cause of action yet, so please get official help. Decompression illness is just generalized barotrauma. Barotrauma meaning pressure. Pressure usually from coming up. You can see it from going down, but for the purpose of decompression illness, we're more concerned with the ascent. And general barotrauma is going to be from joint pain or potentially rashes from the air getting underneath the skin. It's not as significant, but it is definitely something that should be treated by professionals. Pneumothorax is the collection of air outside the lung, but within the lining of the lungs. It basically is kind of like a collapsed lung where you can't breathe in fully and exchange gases, which also causes more problems with outgassing and can cause hypoxia, which will cause you to pass out, quite likely. If you suspect pneumothorax, again, seek qualified medical help, probably a recompression chamber. So diving qualified recompression chambers in our area are going to be Baptist Medical in Jacksonville, Shands in Gainesville, and Florida Hospital in Orlando, which is very, very good because when I started diving, it was Jacksonville or Gainesville. We're the only 2 close by. It's nice that we've gained one in Orlando. Most likely, and I'm not 100% sure on why, they will fly you by helicopter to the treatment center. The reason I question it is you're still dealing with barotrauma, and as you ascend, you're actually taking more pressure off the victim, and it's causing the bubbles to get even larger. I imagine it's not as significant as that first atmosphere of pressure you're coming up against, but it's still something I would say they're either going to have to weigh out the impact of the slight pressure change versus how much longer it will take by ground. And it is going to be expensive for that helicopter ride, which is where Dan comes in. Dan offers insurance specific for diving accidents such as that. I have heard lately Dan's come under a little fire about people not reading what their insurance is covering. Please look into something like Dan and read the fine print. So, how to avoid decompression sickness? Really simple. Plan your dive, dive your plan. I don't care if you're using a computer and you want to follow to the absolute maximum of what your computer says you can do. Plan your dive. Get out your planner, be it electronic, be it a card, whatever. Plan it out, then follow that plan. If your computer says that you can hang out for a little bit longer, that would be completely on you and your computer, but I would recommend using your computer as a backup to your plan, not the other way around. Which brings us to what I grew up with, the PADI no decompression tables, the Recreational Dive Planner. So this was a trip to Blue Grotto Dive Resort. Our dive plan was dive 1 was 100 feet for 7 minutes. We did a surface interval of 1 hour and 30 minutes. Dive 2 is another 100-foot dive for 7 minutes again. So this is our basic layout, and it looks like some parts are missing from this slide. So we're going to drop down to 100 feet for 7 minutes. Going to our table, we're going to look at 100 feet for 7 minutes, puts us as a sea diver. We're going to stay out of the water for an hour and a half. Hour and a half out on a sea diver puts us back to an A diver. We're going to go back down to 100 and 7 minutes again. Our repetitive dive on an A diver to 100 feet is going to give us a residual nitrogen time of 3 minutes. An actual bottom time of 7 minutes gives us a total bottom time of 10 minutes. A dive to 100 feet at 10 minutes is going to bring us back to an E diver group. If you notice that each dive to 100 feet is grayed, that means we need a 3-minute safety stop at 15 feet. So we're going to add our 2 safety stops in. One of the reasons that we're looking at this is our breathing area is limited to 196 feet, which is a whole nother long topic. Our 80 cubic feet tanks that we use keeps us just inside of our dive tables. For the most part, I can do a dive off the table and 1/3 with 1/3 in, 1/3 out, and about a third in reserve. So 1,000 pounds going down and hanging out, then 1,000 pounds coming back up, and I still have between 500 and 1,000 pounds back up. And that's going to be the majority of our experienced divers doing that sort of a dive. Now, if you're going to get into something else more exotic like nitrox, trimix, heliox, really exotic gases, use their tables because saturation diving is very different from no decompression diving that we're showing here. The most important part of all of this is plan your dive and dive your plan. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this little presentation I did. Again, it was one I had to do for a class. If you like this content, please let me know so I can try to do some more of it. Thank you and have a good day.